Late 30s, successful corporate director, corner office, six-figure salary, wardrobe that screams, "I deserve this." Spent all my 20s and early 30s focused entirely on the climb. Dating was for peasants who couldn't focus on their own self-actualization. Marriage, a patriarchal cage designed to shunt female resources toward a mediocre male, always preached that women don't need men for validation, happiness, or financial stability. And I meant it. Men were accessories, disposable options I could vet from my throne of earned power. My standards were astronomical, as they should be. I required a man who was emotionally available, financially superior, physically toned, politically aligned, and ready to worship my career achievements. The mythical unicorn, and I genuinely believed my status entitled me to him. I would swipe through the apps, occasionally matching with some poor supplicant who seemed like he might be useful. I'd demand transparency and emotional labor, and then ghost them the second they showed a hint of weakness or tried to dictate terms. It was exhilarating, exercising that kind of power. Used to joke with my equally successful female colleagues about how low the male bar was. We were the apex predators of the professional world. We had built this life, brick by expensive designer brick. I was truly, genuinely happy, or at least I was perfectly content with my achievements. I bought the big apartment with the panoramic views. I traveled when I wanted. I had my independence, my cats, and my perfect routine. What more could a truly evolved woman need? Then the shift started happening around 35. It wasn't a sudden crash, more like a slow, chilling realization that the air felt thinner at the top. My girlfriends, the ones who were supposed to be climbing with me, started dropping off, not quitting their jobs, but prioritizing soft things. One married a guy she met fixing her boiler, a literal plumber, and now she talks about gardening. Another, the CEO of a tech startup, took 6 months off after having a baby and stopped answering emails after 9 p.m. I judged them silently, feeling superior, but the invitations to those shared, wine-fueled complaining sessions dried up. Now, when I look at my calendar, the weekends are oddly empty. The dating apps used to feed me a steady stream of guys my age who were making 7 figures. Now, the men my age are swiping on me, but they look haggard. Or they look incredible, but they are clearly matching to get a quick hookup and disappear. The quality of the messages dropped precipitously. I started getting messages from 20-somethings who called me MILF and asked if I could mentor them. It was insulting. I am a prize, a successful woman. I am not a stepping stone or a novelty. I adjusted my age filter, widening it slightly. No change. I adjusted my profile, emphasizing my title and salary, hoping to attract men who could match me. That made it worse, if anything. Men my age seemed intimidated by my success. They clearly didn't want a partner. They wanted a subordinate. The patriarchy strikes again, trying to keep successful women isolated. I decided to pivot my strategy. I needed to target a specific type of man. Successful, maybe recently divorced, or someone who had focused on his career like me. Someone who was mature enough to appreciate the value I brought to the table, the status, the intellect, the income. That's how I met him. I'll call him the architect, because that was his job, and because he seemed to design his life with maddening precision. The architect was 40, divorced years ago, financially set. He owned his own firm, looked like he worked out 4 times a week, and dressed with effortless, understated class. He was exactly what I had spent 15 years earning the right to have. He was witty, calm, and listened when I talked about my work, which was refreshing. I decided almost immediately that he was the project, the one I would finally integrate into my perfect life. I would show him how amazing it was to have an equal partner. We went on a few dates, and I brought my A game. I discussed global economics. I dropped names of important people I worked with. I showcased my sophisticated palate. I wanted him to understand that he wasn't just dating a woman, he was dating a lifestyle. But he was aloof, not rude, just entirely self-contained. He paid for things, opened doors, all the performative male stuff, but he never seemed to be investing. He spoke about his hobbies, solo sailing trips, competitive cycling, restoring vintage equipment, all things that didn't involve me, or anyone else, really. I started pushing for commitment, subtly at first. I asked him about his 5-year plan, hinting that it should align with mine. I invited him to my best friend's big engagement party, a high-value social event that would formally introduce him to my circle. He declined, politely, saying he had a week-long cycling tour scheduled that weekend that he booked months ago. I felt a stab of genuine annoyance. He was prioritizing a bicycle over my introduction to my inner social ecosystem. I pressed him later, asking why he was so resistant to planning ahead. I tried to explain the value of a shared future, of building something together. I told him I was looking for a partner, not a playmate. He just smiled, a small, irritatingly serene smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said that he already had a partner, himself. He spoke about how liberating it was to be responsible only for his own happiness. He mentioned the divorce was an expensive education, and that he learned the true cost of outsourcing emotional and financial stability to another person. I heard him saying that he was rich because he didn't have to pay for my lifestyle. I heard him saying that he had bought his freedom and wasn't willing to trade it for a new manager. That's when the rage started to boil. I realized I was dealing with a man who had consciously chosen to opt out of the entire game. He wasn't aspiring to a traditional role, and he certainly wasn't aspiring to me. He wasn't intimidated by my success. He just saw it as a cost center, a resource drain that he wasn't interested in maintaining. I looked at his life: a perfect apartment, expensive hobbies, zero drama, zero obligations, total freedom. He was using his wealth and success to fund his solitude. He was completely inaccessible to my manipulation techniques, my status, my demands for emotional labor. He had designed his life to exclude the entire concept of a high-demand, high-achieving, entitled woman like me. He saw the transaction clearly. I bring status and demands. He brings resources and time, and the demands outweigh the status. I tried to appeal to his morality. I spoke about the innate human need for connection, about how selfish it was to hoard his success. I told him he was missing out on the joy of raising a family or sharing deep intimacy. He listened, nodded calmly, and mentioned that he had already experienced those things and found the ROI negative. ROI. He was measuring partnership in return on investment. It was an unforgivable act of male self-determination. I went silent for a few days, trying to figure out how to force him into my narrative. I was convinced I just needed the right angle, the right amount of pressure, the right demonstration of my undeniable superiority. When I finally called him, I was ready to deliver an ultimatum: either step up and commit to building a future, or walk away. He answered the phone and was perfectly friendly, but preempted me. He said that he had enjoyed our time, but he was starting a new chapter and needed to be fully focused on his own path. He was buying a vineyard overseas and moving there next month. A vineyard. Overseas. Next month. Just like that, he was gone. A phantom I couldn't even guilt trip or shame. He had simply vanished from my sphere of influence, taking his resources and his infuriating self-sufficiency with him. I hung up the phone and walked into my immaculate, silent living room. The sun was setting over the city, reflecting off the glass of the skyscrapers I had conquered. I realized with a cold, sickening clarity that he didn't need me, and that men like him, the ones who had achieved true power and autonomy, were increasingly choosing this path. They weren't settling for the high-maintenance, high-status woman who viewed them as a means to an end. They were building lives where the end was just them. I started to rage, pacing the polished hardwood floor. I felt the full weight of my biological clock, the empty years I had traded for a title that meant nothing in the dating market. My hard-won independence felt like a lonely, sterile cage. I thought of all the dating advice I had given, the sermons I had delivered on female superiority. It all felt hollow now, because it assumed that men would always be there, competing for scraps, needing our validation to function. But they weren't competing. They were leaving. They were looking at the cost, looking at the risk, and looking at the younger women who weren't yet hardened by corporate ambition and cynical entitlement. Women who still offered softness, novelty, and the genuine desire to build a new life, not just manage an existing corporation. The injustice of it all was physically painful. I, the successful, powerful director, was being overlooked for the girl in college or the assistant who still baked cookies. It's not fair. I had earned the right to have a perfect husband. I had sacrificed my youth for this success, and now the successful men were using their success to avoid me. They were literally buying their freedom from the entire expectation of having to deal with a woman who thought she was the prize for their hard work. I staggered to the floor, staring out at my magnificent, empty, utterly pointless view. The tears weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, entitled, incandescent fury. The system was supposed to reward me for my self-focus, but instead, the men I wanted had rewritten the rules and simply stepped off the board entirely. I screamed into the expensive silence of my apartment. Why are men allowed to opt out? Why are they allowed to prioritize their own happiness over my needs? Why is it so hard to find a man who will simply submit to my superiority and be grateful for it? The rage was all-consuming. I realized I wasn't crying because I was lonely. I was crying because I had lost control of the available resources. And now the only men interested in me were the ones the architect would never spare a glance for. It was the ultimate, maddening, self-inflicted defeat. And all I could do was lie there, clutching my 401k statement, sobbing over the vineyard I would never see.